Alright, so I've made this video a couple years in a row now, but I wanted to make it again because there's new people that check out this channel every year, and just, it's still an interesting discussion to have, I think, of the preseason and how much does the preseason actually matter. I am kind of the camp of, I do think preseason matters. Now, statistically, it doesn't. Here's what doesn't matter about the preseason. How good your passer rating was if you're a quarterback does not matter. How great how well you just played as a whole, like your grades and stuff like that. That does not matter. There's no statistical evidence to support that playing well in the preseason is an indicator of future success. A lot of times it's just situation because, again, you get such different situations depending on certain things. There is, I guess, a little bit of, so here's what kind of matters is if you suck in the preseason, you're probably not, it's not a great sign. Like Kellen Mond really struggled in the preseason and didn't work out well for him. So like that is an indicator of failure if you struggle in the preseason. But if you're good, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good. It just means it's like the first hurdle cleared, if that makes sense. Famously, Zach Wilson completely lit it up in the preseason. He looked awesome in the preseason. Didn't quite look as awesome in the regular season. I don't know. Maybe it'll work out at some point for the Jets, but I wouldn't hold out hope. Here's what I think that really does matter for the preseason, though. I think you can find little things in the preseason that can be that can help you feel like, okay, this is where the player was last season, and this is where they are now. This is what they've improved upon. You can find little, small details. I think, an example of this, and this wasn't even preseason, but this was just actually like training camp videos and stuff, is Justin Herbert made some like legitimate, his throwing motion was different. Like when I saw plays of him in practice, because there was no preseason that year, like he all of a sudden, like his throwing motion looks pretty different. And I was like, oh, wait a second, this is a good news for the good news for the Chargers, because he had some inconsistencies, and that was just a small thing to note. Another example is Trey Lance. One of the concerns we had coming out of college with him was sort of his, the intermediate throws and kind of the knowing when to throw a fastball and knowing when to not have to fire it through a gap as much. Those were kind of the things that Trey Lance at times really struggled with in college. And so it was like, how well is he going to do at the NFL level? In the preseason, we saw that he wasn't getting any better at that. And so then I'm like, okay, well, now this is an actual concern, and that does mean something for me. So I think that you have to really look at context when evaluating the preseason. Like I think about someone like CJ Stroud. One of my issues with him is his footwork. So if he comes in, especially like when he's getting pressured up the middle, kind of has some struggles with his footwork. So that's something I'm going to be looking at the college, when I watch his NFL film, is how has that changed at all? And if he now has below average footwork, I'm going to be like, when he's getting pressured up the middle, I'm going to be like, whoa, this is great news. He's getting better at this situation. And that might be confusing for some people who don't watch college football. If I'm, excited about that, but then if Bryce Young, who didn't really have that issue, if he's better at it in college and I don't get excited about, in the preseason, and I don't get excited about it, people might sit here and say, well, wait a second, you're being biased. Well, no, I'm taking the context into account. And that's something I think you really have to pay attention to in the preseason. Again, the mid-round picks definitely can be interesting as well. I remember Max Crosby having a really impactful preseason, even though he was he had a cast on one of his hands, and that was something that was fascinating. And the other thing I like is I just think it's fun to talk about preseason football. I just enjoy doing it. It's the season's coming back. Let's talk about some of these players we've never seen play before and how they can do. So, does the preseason matter? Well, I enjoy doing it. And I enjoy talking about it, and many other people do as well. So because of that alone, it matters. And B, in small ways, yes, although not in the biggest of ways. Now, there's the other way we can talk about it, which is, should you play in the preseason or should you not? That's a discussion that gets, that always happens when someone gets injured, right? Every year, it seems like some major player gets injured in a meaningless preseason game, and everyone kind of says, what are we even doing here? Why would you risk, losing one of your players for, an entire season sometimes. Tony Romo got hurt. That was the year that Dak Prescott came in and worked out all right for the Cowboys that year. But still, it's sort of like, do you want to risk something like that happening? I think the counter argument is that, well, sure, I get it that yes, injuries can happen, but injuries can always happen. And the preseason doesn't have a ton of injuries compared to the regular season, especially not in the first quarter when you have starters out there just trying to, make sure they don't get hurt. I think the other aspect is you do need to get those hits, and getting hit and sort of getting back into football speed is a very real thing. Look at Deshaun Watson, who, didn't play football for a while and weirdly didn't play much preseason. I don't know what the Browns were doing there. They did not have him. He looked very rusty when he came back, right? I think you see it happen pretty frequently where guys who don't play in the preseason takes a couple weeks to kind of get back into the thick of things. So I do think that it's an interesting thing. I do think it's a disadvantage to not play in the preseason for the beginning of the season. I think that there is a higher risk in having players play in the preseason, and I think there's not necessarily a massively high reward either, but the risk doesn't have that high of a likelihood of it happening, if that makes sense. Because it's not just risk versus reward. It's also what are the percentage chance of you getting the reward, and what are the percentage chance of you of the worst case scenario happening. The worst case scenario happening very rarely happens. A player missing significant time due to injury. That's not something that frequently happens. It actually happens far more frequently in practice than it does in a preseason game. The other aspect of this is that the reward is very likely to happen. Whereas if you don't play, you're guaranteed to not get, you know what you're getting. You know you're getting a, disadvantage early on, but an advantage in that, nothing terrible is going to happen. But at the end of the day, something terrible could happen regardless. If you're having your players play in the preseason, I think I would have my players play in the preseason. But really what I would do if I was a team is just, run some studies on it and figure it out that way. I think is probably the best way to handle that. But if I can't do that, I think I would still have them play in the preseason because, there's always a chance someone could get injured. Yes, it's a higher chance to play in the preseason, but not that much higher. So I think preseason matters. It doesn't mean everything, but it doesn't mean nothing either, and I think it's fun. So either way, I'm excited preseason football is about to be back. Let me know what you think of the preseason in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.